right eye. He was lean and wiry rather than muscular and building a stomach, but even standing still, the man looked dangerous. Anyone who survived 5 years as a captain had to be practically unkillable, but even those who didn't know his reputation tended to give him plenty of room. There was something about Hawke, something cold and unyielding, that gave even the hardest bravo cause to think twice. He wore the standard furs and black cloak of the guard's winter uniform with little style and less grace. Even on a good day, Hawke tended to look as though he got dressed in the dark, in a hurry. He wore his dark hair at shoulder length, swept back from his forehead and tied at the nape with a silver clasp. He'd only just turned 30, but already there were streaks of grey in his hair. On his right hip, Hawke carried a short-handled axe instead of a sword. He was very good with an axe. He'd had lots of practice. Isabel Fisher leant companionably against him, putting an edge on a throwing knife with a whetstone. She was tall, easily 6 feet in height, and her long blonde hair fell to her waist in a single thick plait, weighted at the tip with a polished steel ball. She was heading into her late 20s, and handsome rather than beautiful. There was a raw-boned harshness to her face that suggested strength and stubbornness, only slightly softened by her deep blue eyes and generous mouth. Sometime in the past, something had scoured all the human weakness out of her, and it showed. She wore a sword on her hip in a battered scabbard, and her prowess with that blade was already legendary in a city used to legends. A steady murmur of conversation rose and fell around Hawke and Fisher as the guard captains brought each other up to date on the latest gossip and exchanged ritual complaints about the lousy coffee and the necessity of working the graveyard shift. As in most cities, the night brought out the worst in Haven, but the graveyard shift paid the best, and there were always those who needed the extra money. As winter approached and the trade routes shut down one by one, choked by snow and ice and bitter storms, prices in the markets rose accordingly, which was why every winter Hawke and Fisher, and others like them, worked from 10 at night to 6 in the morning and complained about it a lot. Hawke leant back against the wall, his arms folded and his chin resting on his chest. He was never at his best at the beginning of a shift, and the recent change in schedules had just made him worse. Hawke hated having his sleeping routine changed. Fisher nudged him with her elbow, and his head came up an inch. He looked quickly round the squad room, satisfied himself the commander wasn't there yet, and let his chin sink back onto his chest. His eye closed. Fisher sighed and looked away. She just hoped he wouldn't start snoring again. She checked the edge on her knife and plucked a hair from Hawke's head to test it. He didn't react. The door flew open, and Commander Dubois stalked in, clutching a thick sheaf of papers. The guard captains quieted down and came to some sort of attention. Fisher put away her knife and whetstone and elbowed Hawke sharply. He straightened up with a grunt and fixed his bleary eye on Dubois as the commander glared out over the squad room. Dubois was short and stocky and bald as an egg. He'd been a commander for 23 years, and it hadn't improved his disposition one bit. He'd been a hell of a thief-taker in his day, but he'd taken one chance too many, and 6 thugs took it in turn to stamp on his legs till they broke. The doctors said he'd never walk again. They didn't know Dubois. These days he spent most of his time overseeing operations, fighting the council for a higher budget, and training new recruits. After 3 weeks of his slave-driving and caustic wit, most recruits looked forward to hitting the streets of Haven as the lesser of two evils. It was truly said among the guard that if you could survive Dubois, you could survive anything.
"All right, pay attention."
Dubois looked sternly about him.
"First, the good news. The council's approved the money for overtime payments starting immediately. Now, the bad news. You're going to earn it. Early this morning there was a riot in the Devil's Hook. 57 dead, 23 injured. 2 of the dead were guards, Constables Campbell and Grishkowiak. Funerals on Thursday. Those wishing to attend, line up your replacements by Tuesday latest. It's your responsibility to make sure you're covered. More bad news. The Dock Workers Guild is threatening to resume their strike unless the dock owners agree to spend more money on safe working conditions, which means we can expect more riots. I've doubled the number of constables in and around the docks, but keep your eyes open. Riots have a way of spreading, and as if we didn't have enough to worry about, last night someone broke into the main catacomb.